On December 19th, 1854, while walking on a miner's trail along the North Fork of the American River, Dr. Bolivar Sparks, James McDonald, and Captain Jonathan R. Davis were bushwhacked by an international band of bandits. The bandits, a Frenchman, 2 Americans, 2 Britons, 4 Mexicans, and 4 Australians, had robbed and killed 4 American miners on the previous day and 6 Chinese miners on the day before that. Several of the bandits were members of the Sydney Ducks gang. They were tough, bloodthirsty ex-convicts from Australia, who, after being released, decided to travel to San Francisco to try and follow the gold rush. But, shunning hard work, they found it much easier to prey upon the vulnerable around the docks of San Francisco Bay. As the bandits attacked, James McDonald was killed instantly by a bullet. And Dr. Sparks, he was fatally wounded as well. However, Captain Davis, he was a different story. Captain Davis pulled out both of his pistols, and he ended up killing 7 of the bandits in short order. Later, when asked about it, he recalled that he was in a fever of excitement at the time. As he described it, he was unfazed. He stood his ground, pulled both pistols, and started firing a barrage of bullets at the charging outlaws. Davis's shooting skills stood him in good stead. One after another, he shot down his attackers. The outlaw bullets tore at Davis's clothing, but they only caused 2 slight flesh wounds. Within moments, 7 of the bandits were dead or dying on the ground, and Davis's pistols were empty. Now, being out of bullets, Davis was also an expert fencer. He pulled out his Bowie knife, and he ended up killing 4 more of his attackers. And it happened in just such a way. The bandits were also armed with Bowie knives. 3 of them were. One of them had a short sword, and they now closed in on the captain to finish him off, or so they thought. Davis whipped out his Bowie knife. He warded off the thrusts from the 2 most aggressive bandits. He stabbed one of them to death. The other he disarmed by knocking the knife from his hand and slicing off his nose and a finger of his right hand. Out of fight, the noseless gang member confessed that the band had but recently joined together and had slain the 2 parties of Chinese and Americans. The next day, someone examined Captain Davis's hat and found that 6 balls had passed through it. Miners buried McDonald and the dead robbers. The surviving bandit's wounds proved serious, and with the loss of blood, he died later in the day as well. News of this deadly fight traveled fast and wide, and soon after, Captain Jonathan R. Davis became a minor celebrity.
The art of war among the white race is called strategy or tactics. When practiced by the Indians, it is called treachery. They employed the art of deceiving, misleading, decoying, and surprising the enemy with great cleverness. The celerity and secrecy of their movements were never excelled by the warriors of any country. They had courage, skill, sagacity, endurance, fortitude, and self-sacrifice of a high order. They had rules of civility in their intercourse among themselves, or with strangers and in their councils. Some of these we could copy to our advantage. With their enemies, they believed it right to take every advantage. If one of their own tribe committed a serious offense or crime, they believed it right for the victim to administer swift retribution, and the whole tribe approved. Among their own tribe and people, they had a code of honor which all respected. An Indian could leave his horse, blanket, saddle, or rifle at any place by night or day, and it would not be disturbed, though the whole tribe might pass near. This could not be done in any community of white people. General Nelson A. Miles.
In 1890, in a letter to the commander of the Army, General Miles stated,
"One point is of vital importance. The difficult Indian problem cannot be solved permanently at this end of the line. It requires the fulfillment by Congress of the treaty obligations which the Indians were entreated and coerced into signing. They signed away a valuable portion of their reservation, and it is now occupied by white people, for which they have received nothing. They understood that ample provision would be made for their support. Instead, their supplies have been reduced, and much of the time they have been living on half and two-thirds rations. Their crops, as well as the crops of the white people, for 2 years have been almost a total failure. The disaffection is widespread, especially among the Sioux, while the Cheyennes have been on the verge of starvation and were forced to commit depredations to sustain life. These facts are beyond question, and the evidence is positive and sustained by thousands of witnesses. Serious difficulty has been gathering for years. Congress has been in session several weeks and could in a single hour confirm the treaties and appropriate the necessary funds for their fulfillment, which their commissioners and the highest officials of the government have guaranteed to these people. And unless the officers of the Army can give some positive assurance that the government intends to act in good faith with these people, the loyal element will be diminished and the hostile element increased. If the government will give some positive assurance that it will fulfill its part of the understanding with these 20,000 Sioux Indians, they can safely trust the military authorities to subjugate, control, and govern these turbulent people.
A shooting affray took place here about 10 o'clock this evening in the office of the saloon of Ellis and Bean. George Ellis, George Edwards, Lou Burson, and another man were sitting around the stove when J.W. O'Bannon, said to be from Gainesville, stepped in the doorway and throwing down a double-barrel shotgun on Burson said, "Now you will retract, won't you?" and fired one barrel striking Burson in the left arm near the elbow, making a troublesome though not serious wound. 3 shots entered the left breast. Burson then drew his 6-shooter and fired 5 shots at O'Bannon, who dodged out of sight and then stepped back and fired the other barrel and ran away. He has not yet been arrested. It seems that O'Bannon was drunk and had been disturbing the audience at the Opera House during the performance of Only a Woman's Heart, and Burson had requested him to be quiet. Burson went to the saloon, and O'Bannon soon appeared and began talking abusively of Colonel Young of this county, a friend of Burson's. The latter remonstrated with him and finally knocked him down. O'Bannon left the saloon and soon returned when the shooting took place. Nearly every man in town was at the Opera House, and there was no one on hand soon enough to ascertain which direction O'Bannon took. A posse is now in pursuit, and the sheriff has turned out his dogs, but it has not been learned whether they have taken the trail. Burson is resting comfortably, and the doctor says his wound will be pretty sore, but nothing more serious is apprehended. A cowboy named Love, while making an attack last night on Mr. William, one of the proprietors of the Enipentuck Saloon, accidentally killed Charles Little, an innocent man. Love, in the early part of the night, visited a dance which was going on. Failing to procure a partner, he became somewhat insulted, and during the fit of disappointment, smashed some of the ballroom crockery. After the dance, he found his way to the Nip and Tuck Saloon, and there overheard William make some remark derogatory to his late behavior. Love instantly struck William, whereupon a fight followed, in which the cowboy got badly used up. His pistol, which he attempted to draw, was taken from him. He beat a retreat from the saloon, and after getting possession of another weapon, he returned and opened fire in front of the saloon, shooting promiscuously. Mr. Little was standing near the door and received the fatal bullet, which entered his stomach and came out near the spine. The sheriff was present, but nevertheless the murderer escaped.
I probably knew as much about John Wesley Hardin as any other Texan. I witnessed the tragedy when he killed Morgan at Cuero, and I kept pretty well up with his whereabouts and doings after I first made his acquaintance in Cuero in 1874, shortly after he came to DeWitt County and attached himself to the Taylor crowd. Jim Taylor was their leader at that time. John Wesley Hardin had just killed the sheriff of Comanche County, and being a first cousin to Jim Taylor, he naturally joined his crowd, well knowing he could bid defiance to all sheriffs in the state with the Taylors at his back. He was a good-looking man, quiet and unassuming. In stature, he stood probably about 5 feet 10 inches and weighed about 160 pounds. He had brown hair and eyes, and he wore whiskers always neatly trimmed. In manners, he showed good raising. My father for many years kept up 2 cattle ranches, corrals and boarding houses for the cattle shipping trade, the home ranch being located on the Agua Dulce, a tributary to Big Chocolate Bayou 20 miles from Indianola and 6 miles from Port Lavaca. The other ranch was situated 5 miles from Indianola. At each ranch there were 6 or 7 large corrals, each having a capacity of holding 500 large steers. When the Gulf, Western Texas, and Pacific Railroad reached the present town of Cuero, there followed a boom, and the town grew almost overnight. John Swartz, a butcher of Indianola, wanted to get into business there, but he did not have sufficient money for the enterprise, and my father agreed to set him up to the butcher business, stipulating, though, that the firm was to be a neutral concern, showing no preference in who they bought their fat beeves and muttons from. The new market proved popular from the very start, and the heavy purchases obliged the butcher to employ herders to take care of the beeves secured, as they could not be turned loose on the range. On the day of Hardin's arrival, Jim Taylor brought him direct to Hatch and Swartz Market and introduced him to my father, John Swartz, and myself. I thought him a fine-looking cowboy. He wore goatskin leggings, white linen shirt, a silk handkerchief in lieu of a collar and cravat, velvet jacket, cowboy shot-made boots, and a silk sash. In this sash, he had shoved a naked Colt's .45 pistol, leaving his belt and holster on his saddle. Jim Taylor and Harden were dressed very much alike, with the exception of leggings, Taylor's being heavy leather and better suited for a chase through catclaw thickets when running cattle. I had known Taylor for a number of years, and to know him was to like him. Nothing of the desperado in his makeup. Shortly after this, there came into Hardin's life a controlling influence that really worked for good. I refer to his marriage to an excellent woman who, if I remember rightly, she was the daughter of Neil Bowen. I may be mistaken in the identity of this lady, but there is no mistake in the influence that she wielded over John Wesley Hardin for his good. While it began in DeWitt County, this influence followed him to Florida, and from there back to Comanche County, Texas, where he received a sentence of 25 years in the penitentiary for the killing of the sheriff of that county. And after beginning his sentence at Huntsville, that influence was so strong that Hardin professed religion and opened a Bible class among the convicts. He made friends with the penitentiary warden and other prison officials and proved himself a model prisoner. Sometime after he began serving his sentence, a number of desperate convicts planned to overpower the guards and escape, and because of his friendliness to the prison officials, Hardin was kept in ignorance of the plot. The plan was to overpower and kill a certain number of the guards, capture the arsenal, then arm and liberate all long-term prisoners. And but for John Wesley Hardin, the plan would have been a complete success. As soon as the rush started, the convicts seized guns and began shooting down guards, and were rapidly gaining flight when the warden rushed to Hardin's cell and asked him if he would help put down the insurrection. Well, he told the warden to arm him and he would do all that he could. They hurried to the attack and began pouring a deadly fire into the convicts, and when they saw Hardin with the guards and saw several of their men go down before the accuracy of his aim, they began to weaken, and the handful of guards, with Hardin's help, drove each surviving criminal back to his cell. When all were safely locked up, Harden surrendered his borrowed gun to the warden and asked to be conducted back to his own cell. Thus he became the hero of the Huntsville Penitentiary. The newspapers published accounts of his heroic assistance in suppressing the uprising of the convicts, and many visitors were given permits to interview him. In fact, a movement was started to get a pardon for him, prison officials and people on the outside becoming interested in this matter. Petitions were circulated and the necessary steps were taken. And in the midst of it all, a little woman was rejoicing, for she realized that her work and her influence had not been in vain. She believed in John Wesley Hardin, and she believed she could reform the man she so dearly loved. Shortly after he received his pardon and was released from the penitentiary, Hardin was admitted to the bar and moved to a border city and engaged in law practice, with what success, though I'm unable to say. I do not know what became of his wife, whose influence over him was always for his betterment. John Wesley Hardin was a most remarkable man. He killed many men, it is true, but he killed them because they hunted him as they would have hunted a wild and dangerous animal. He killed them knowing that if he did not kill them, they would kill him. And self-defense is the first law of nature. His capture at the time he was arrested and convicted was planned and carried out for $2,000 placed on his head. No one was killed at the time of his capture, as had been erroneously reported. And when his earthly career was brought to a sudden end, he was shot through the back of the head and never saw the gun that killed him.